Oh no. Oh, we're live!
Whoa! Hi and welcome everyone. My name's Stephen Ridgway and this is TalkingVTE number 40 for February 2015, the very first vodcast for the year. Perhaps we'll make a start by just going around the room and everyone introducing themselves. To my right, of course.
Robin J. Hi everyone.
And the online audience.
I'm Michael Coughlin in Adelaide. Alison Miller is also in Adelaide, and we're half an hour before you guys and going to stay that way.
The internet allows us to be half an hour. On this side, Alexander Hayes and Jacinta Gascoigne, FLL 2003.
Yeah, long time ago.
Mm.
With Michael, I'm
That's
pleased
right.
to say.
Was with Michael.
Yes, I was a lucky girl.
Mm.
That's Robin. Surprised for you.
Oh, you're all three in the same year. There
Yeah.
you go. And Alison.
Beautiful. Vance has just come in, so he might be able to hear us. So yes, I'm in Adelaide with Michael, but I'm in Adelaide that's half an hour behind these guys and not half an hour ahead of them, and we will remain that way as well.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Hello.
You there?
In, I think.
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah. I had to put in my VPN.
Yeah.
I've been having a lot of problems with Hangout lately. Hey, Alex, nice to see you.
Hey, great to see you, Vance.
Yeah.
Hey,
Mm-hmm.
nice to see you. What's the Hangout symbol? That one.
That's what we do in Hawaii, what we used to anyway.
That's right, hanging out.
But if I got a VPN, I could set it for Hawaii, and then you wouldn't know, right?
That's it.
All right.
So Vance, do you need to do a VPN because of internet restrictions?
I don't know. There are internet restrictions in the UAE, so but they're lightening up quite a bit. So normally I don't have to, but anyway. But lately I've been getting a lot of timeouts on Hangouts. So this one has stayed here for almost 3 minutes now. So that's a good sign.
So we won't be offended if you disappear then.
Well, yeah. The other day I hosted a Hangout, and it was very strange. I had two computers because I was dropping out of one, so I started another one. So I had two of myself in the Hangout. But at one point, the computer that I was moderating from froze. That is, the browser froze, the Hangout froze. Everything else was working, but I couldn't. And the other computer, it did what it just did. You could see my text, but I wasn't connecting. So on one computer, I couldn't see what was going on. And the other computer, I could see what the other people were doing, but I couldn't, and I could hear them from that computer. But
Vance is the number.
It was really odd because I found out that my video was showing, my audio was, I was communicating, and I just had to run it, without being able to see anything or without being able to mute, without having any functionality. But the recording came out fine. I saw it later and it looked great. Apart from me.
All right. Well, we shall get the discussion underway, and welcome everyone. Look, we had a little chat earlier about what the broad territory of the podcast is going to be, and there is some stuff on the session notes. But broadly speaking, it's about the transformation of the vet sector in Australia over the last 10, 20 years, I guess, but particularly about more recent changes that have been quite dramatic. So probably some of the older statespeople, yourself and Michael, might want to kick that off because you've been in the vet sector probably the longest. In reflection on...
Thank you, Michael. We knew that.
Yes.
Vet equals...
Yeah, but maybe Vance had forgotten.
By the way, I've been listening to your podcast for years. Apart from that, I have little to do with the vet sector. But I'm kind of attuned to where you're coming from.
Well, actually, isn't the UAE adopting the Australian vet system? I rather thought that we had a whole lot of people from TAFE go over to the UAE and try to just dump the whole model there. Am I wrong there? Anyone heard of that?
Not in a military college, you don't.
Yeah, and maybe it's maybe since I'm in language teaching, perhaps. But well, anyway, perhaps it's in a different sector. I teach at through the higher colleges, and there just doesn't seem to be none of that information has trickled down to me. Although I've been here for 15 years now.
TAFE South Australia are currently working in Dubai in a brand new college and have been asked to kind of get this, lead them into the e-learning world.
Woohoo! And there we are, you see.
Which college?
I don't know the name of it, Vance, but there was a big tender just before I quit TAFE, and TAFE SA produced these incredibly beautiful looking booklets about an inch thick, and I just laughed and thought, it's all lies. However, it won the day, and they got the gig.
This isn't being recorded, right?
Hope so. I'm free now.
Yeah.
There's no blind leading the blind here. Live and recorded.
So yes, there is probably other Australian TAFEs too, very active in the UAE, in the vet sector, Vance. So obviously not in language learning or in higher ed.
Well, I'll Google that while I'm listening.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things that came up for me. It's one of the interesting things that came up for me in doing the background research for this was how the TAFE model, not the TAFE model, the vet model in Australia, particularly the idea of a national training system and the AQF.
You froze, Steph.
Yeah.
So you're still there, Jacinta, Alex?
Yes.
Yeah, we're here.
Still here.
Yeah, still here.
Unusual to lose. Okay, Steph, you froze.
Yeah, I was just commenting on the research that I'd done. There was quite a recurring theme of other countries looking favourably on at the Australian vet sector, particularly the national training system, national qualifications, national standards, quite with envy that they would have that in their countries.
Certainly 10 years ago that was, or not 10 years ago, but yeah, 10 or 12 years ago that was certainly the case in the UK. Anyway, I thought it was very difficult to do any kind of analysis of the current changes in vet without some kind of picture. There may be people listening to this who, don't really know from whence we came in terms of vet. So, I've spent a bit of time reflecting back on what it was like when I started, which was 1992. But prior to that, it was the WEAs, which came out of the workers' union, and I guess neighbourhood houses and certainly tech colleges. I went to tech college with my mum when I was about 16 to do life drawing. So, yeah, Michael, you might like to, because you and I have had quite different histories in vet. Be interesting to hear about your kind of reflections of what vet was like when you started.
Well, I don't need to have a stab at what it was like because I remember what it was like, so it's not my version. It's a description of what it was like. And I, like you, Robin, was in the language and literacy area, specifically ESL. But if I was to think back, and I've written about this in other places that you may or may not have read, but that doesn't matter. What I remember is that there was a lot more trust in staff. I mean, that's a double-edged sword, of course. I couldn't believe, because I came out of the school system where there was a fair bit of control and supervision about what I did on a daily basis, and I walked into an adult learning environment where I was visited, I don't know, every couple of months, that it was assumed I was marking the roll, that I was keeping results, that I was doing valid assessments. And I just think that, and I saw that change over the 25 years in TAFE, and this is a very personal thing. And I'm certainly the kind of person that if you want to get the best out of me, trust me. Try and control me, measure me, harness me, I'll rebel, and you won't get the best out of me. And I've often wondered how many other people there are around who would have 20 years ago felt like they were trusted. And as every year went by, particularly in the last 10 years, the trust and the lack and the diminishing trust of the standard teacher from management and above was palpable. And it was really sad, and it was really stupid, and it was really backward, and had incredibly negative impacts across the organisation. So that's one thing. The other thing that was very prevalent back then was social justice was real. Social justice is part of why we were there. Yes, we were subject experts. We were to teach what we taught and impart skills, but it was accepted and acknowledged that part of what you did was about social justice. The TAFE vet was a place that people came to who couldn't make it into higher ed or couldn't get work, they needed another place to kind of fill in the gaps that their life, held for them. So, and that probably earlier than 10 years ago, about 15 years ago, that started to disappear. And this was all, and you could see it then, this was all about it's so difficult to measure the gains of people who typically are in that situation because life's been a bit, more of a struggle for those people. Their gains weren't obvious and their gains were slow, but you knew as a professional that where the gains were there, and sometimes those gains, again, were not academic. They couldn't be measured in marks, or they couldn't be measured in the numbers of curriculum hours they'd scored in terms of the system, but you knew you were making progress with those people because there was a different set of metrics, is the word now, which didn't exist back then, by which you measured people's performance. So over the years, if you couldn't measure it hard and fast on some kind of stick or ruler and put a dollar value against it, then it went. And the other thing that was a huge change, and I mean, I sit back and think, I was incredibly fortunate, as many of us in this room were. TAFE/the vet system paid for me to go overseas and research and appear at conferences and learn from overseas colleagues 5 times. And that was about innovation. TAFE and VET spent money on innovation, and we promoted ourselves and we listened to the rest of the world about how we could position ourselves as VET providers. So they're the 3 things for me: the lack of social justice, the emphasis that crept in on measuring and lack of trust, and the complete ditching of anything to do with innovation, which of course means taking risk, which means maybe failure, because you can't measure failure either. You can't measure it, therefore we won't fund it. So for me, they're the main things that I saw in my time.
So I actually started out in Skillshare, which was an employment program, essentially, funded for. Shame Melanie's not here because she's got a better memory than me. But like you, Michael, I started out running a literacy numeracy program. I think to add to what you've already said, there was a lot more flexibility in what we did. There was a lot more funding. And I think the focus was much more on learners and their needs. I think my favourite saying at the time was that the sorts of students we got, it took 6 months for them to even start to feel good about themselves as learners again. And they were students who the school system had failed. And the sorts of people who came through our door wouldn't be brave enough to walk in the front gates of a TAFE. So, you know, we had a custom-built centre for that, lots of money, lots of freedom. I think another big thing then, and I support what you said about social justice, Michael, is that we worked with people with disabilities, we worked with grandparents, retirees, not necessarily people who needed to or wanted to enter the workforce. They were people who wanted to improve their skills. And now, apart from probably U3A and a few isolated programs, that doesn't exist, and that's a really sad thing. I don't know what can be done about that kind of thing. I said to Steph just yesterday, where are these people now? Where do they go to get the kinds of support that we provided? So, TAFE took on board a lot of the national system a lot later, but in the early 90s I saw the introduction of training packages. Before that we had to purchase curricula, and there was a big long list. You had no idea what was good, what was bad. It was word of mouth pretty much. I saw the introduction of competency-based training and assessment. We kind of take it for granted they've been there, but no, they were all introduced. Saw the introduction of VTAB and organised an audit in the early 90s. And then Skillshare and a lot of the employment programs that were largely Keating, I think, programs. He was very big on jobs for all, and
there was the training subsidy, wasn't there?
Lots of different programs around that time.
Were taxed, and they had to put that tax
2% at one point.
2% into education, and that had a significant impact.
But these people we worked with were long-term unemployed. There were good things, there were bad things too, I guess. But from there, Skillshare folded. I spent a bit of time casual teaching in TAFE, so I knew what the TAFE system was like. And from there went into the A sector, which is now community colleges. Has anyone else been around before 2000 who wants to kind of shed some more light on life back then?
Yeah. I started working with TAFE in 1996, and things are very much about the same. Bums on seats, subsidiaries. We were talking about it earlier tonight, around funding models, indigeneity, around courses that were seen as priority or not priority. Economics, very little has changed in that respect. Yeah, not much has changed effectively. But we are in a low tide system at the moment. The boats are fairly low tide. I had Tony in the building today. I didn't throw any rotten fruit.
I'm surprised to hear you describe it as nothing's changed, Alex, because I was teaching in TAFE in about that same time, and we had rooms full of young people with disabilities who were writing their own books and all sorts of programs that were much more open and much more life-based.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything that
what I'm signalling is that there's been a political change. There's been 3 shifts in that period of time. We know every 7 to 10 years there's an economic shift. There's also a political shift in Australia. We're still celebrating Australia Day as, like, it's not an invasion day. But every 7 to 10 years we have a complete change of happening. And we have to recognise that that's what happens every 7 to 10 years. And we have a beautiful time, we have a fantastic time, everything goes well for 5 to 7 years or so. And then we cut back to that, the economic rationalism, back to the war, back on ISIS, we're back on all that side of it, all over again.
Yeah, I agree about that, but I think there has been overall during that period of time, as Michael alluded to, a gradual shift away from that kind of post-school education as a right, as an Australian citizen, to the total opposite now. And, you know, we've kind of, underneath that has been a bit of a, you know, a wave of, you know, programs coming and going and funding cuts and priorities changing. But I think, you know, underpinning this discussion needs to be some kind of, you know, awareness of the working life that people had early on, who are now potentially in senior management positions, or as some of us have been, kind of getting sidelined.
I mean, both you and Michael obviously own a particular area within the vet sector, but I mean, that probably is more about social inclusion. It's more about, you know, second chance education, literacy and numeracy, and, you know, there is that side of TAFE, the vet sector, which is also about skills for industry and the apprenticeship programs, for instance. You know, the tech college aspect of the vet sector, which is, you know, quite a different focus, which is really tied to industry. I mean, the sort of training that you did, although it was about building, potentially making people able to participate, it's about enabling participation, where, you know, whereas there's that other aspect of the vet sector, which is about giving people tangible skills so they can actually do their jobs.
Yeah, but that was there too. That you know, I think there are, you know, a number of people that we know who have remained in the English language and literacy areas, who, you know, are beside themselves with grief over the changes that have happened during that time. But I still think, you know, there were, even within the standard vet programs, there was a different approach, a different underpinning attitude towards it.
Well, it's interesting because all of the sort of national targets, whether they be COAG or whether they be the state governments, all have literacy and numeracy targets, because any of the literature that you read, the levels of literacy and numeracy in our country are really low. And,
but they don't fund it.
Why don't we fund it?
No, they don't fund it. Yes, that goes into every document. It's like mentioning, you know, the gay whales. It's got to be in there, but they don't do anything about it.
No, in fact, the WELL program, Workplace English Language Literacy program, that started in the early 90s, has been axed by the current government. So and the literacy programs we know of have lost funding and staff. So I don't quite know how it is being addressed now. When did the TAFE become TAFE? I mean, when did it cease being tech colleges?
Oh, that's a good point. Actually, I've got that here.
And move to that kind of broader agenda of education.
I think it happens in the 1940s. There's a shift there. In the post-war period, there was increasing funding by the states, particularly in what you might broadly say is a sort of technical training sector. And the next major moment, I suppose, is the 1960s, where there's that so-called Kangan report, and there you start to see the Commonwealth investing in the vet sector, and particularly post-Whitlam you see quite a significant, in the 1974 and on you see significant investment in the vet sector, and particularly, I suppose, in Australia in the TAFE sector, particularly.
But it was still tech. It was still a tech college in the 70s. So I just can't remember. Michael, can you remember when TAFE became TAFE?
No, I can't remember. I mean, I came in sort of 88, and it was TAFE. So for me, it was always TAFE.
Yeah, well,
Steph, I just wanted to kind of chuck an example of how what you were saying about Robin and I's background and the kind of people we worked with, as in, ESL or language and literacy people. But I heard stories over the last 12 months of automotive, plumbing and other, technical areas, kind of standard TAFE programs where they used to run like a half-hour or an hour session a couple of times a week for students who were struggling. Gone. Not funded. You could do it, but you did it in your own time. You were no longer allowed to do that as part of your allocated teaching load. So it wasn't just in our programs, what you say is correct, but that kind of slashing of all those extra support things was very much targeted and removed. And as Brad Beach, I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him in absentia, he said GIPS TAFE removed everything that had the word support in it, and the only thing that stayed was the canteen. They even had a conversation at one point about closing the canteen.
Yeah, well, I hear you there, and I suppose there's that shift, particularly by the government more than anything, towards an investment in the educational sector that would have direct employment outcomes. And I suppose those individuals that have an investment that don't result in employment outcomes, then perhaps they don't want to spend the money.
It just takes longer. And no, they weren't prepared to allow that longer period. Alison Miller, are you still here?
I am. I'm kind of multitasking, but I am. I'm just thinking in terms of the continuum of time, whether the need, the changing skill need in that time. So it'd be interesting to think about when, even when my sister left school, or even when I left school, there was still, you could pick up jobs in offices and retail. There were lots of factory jobs that you could go to. There are lots of kind of tradie jobs that you could go to. Where the either need or the desire is more higher end jobs which require higher end skills. So is that been some of the reason for the shift of where some of the funding has gone? So there's been a push over the last couple of years to increase the number of people who've got a bachelor or higher, as opposed to starting at a different end of education. But at the same time, it's recognised that working-aged Australians don't have, was it about levels 3 in the Australian core skills framework in terms of language literacy and numeracy. So the demand for these skills has not gone anywhere. Perhaps it's just where the money for developing people's skills perhaps has changed.
I had a conversation yesterday with a friend who is kind of trying to get a discussion going on LinkedIn at the moment, and it's basically that issue of, and it's not common to the vet sector, it's not only the vet sector, it's going across that board, it's what I see as an overemphasis on assessment and reporting. And like I said earlier, if it can't be measured, they won't fund it. Whereas I think that's a very dangerous road for a society to go down. I mean, if we had that as an operating principle of schools, they'd all be closed. I mean, school is a place where you're allowed to more or less develop at your own pace, and it's not about as much, if you don't pass grade 6, you have to leave the school. So there's still an element there of kind of tolerating individual differences, and the fact that it takes time to reach your maturity, whatever your goal is. And I think as a society, we're now stuck in this thing, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist and it won't be funding it. And I just think that's a very cold, clinical, dangerous path to follow as a nation.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I hear what you're saying, Michael. I mean, I think there are two forces at work there. One is perhaps the very idea of the national training system itself, and the whole idea of training packages, and the whole idea of being able to quantify skills that are relevant to particular industries, and then set them out, and then, I guess, regulate in some consistent way whether a person has achieved those competencies. And that necessarily involves a form of measurement, a form of rationalisation. It's not necessarily cold-hearted, but it's a desire to form a baseline for quality, for consistency, for so that an employer, when they get someone walk through their door, they don't have to say, "Oh, did Michael Cogden teach him? Oh, he's a great guy, and I know that he does wonders with his students." It's not about Michael. It's about the fact that he can, or she can, look at this piece of paper and say that person is as good as someone who did a course in Victoria.
But don't you think that's very much that's the kind of factory fodder model? That's the widget in whole kind of approach to working lives. I think what Michael's kind of alluding to are more the development of kind of soft skills, if you like, which we know are highly valued by employers. But how do you teach? Should we be teaching those? How do you teach those, and how do you measure those things?
Well, look,
because I don't know if Michael and Jacinta were there, but I can remember a conference a long time ago where somebody stood up and said, they were from Cairns, they were in hospitality, and they said, we don't care about the practical skills. We'll teach them that. What we want are people that we can employ who are going to fit in with our team, are going to be flexible and trustworthy and show initiative and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
that's about ensuring that the training package has those aspects.
But how can you have that in a competency-based training and assessment?
Well, wasn't there a time where they sought to embed communication competencies across all training packages?
Yeah, but communication comes down in a training package comes down to being able to write a particular thing or speak a particular thing. So I think this is quite different.
Yeah,
but we're attempting to do that. Alison, how well is that done where you work? So you're still a live TAFE teacher, and your colleagues have to take into account, as you do, things like negotiating conflict, problem solving, all the soft skills. Is it done? Is it done well?
I mean, I think it was around 2006, 2007. There was a big push. There was the embedding of employability skills into training packages that was supposed to be more explicit, that people were supposed to spend more time on employability skills, because, as Robin's talked about, that and some people hate this statement, but I am a big believer that the soft skills, what people call the soft skills, are actually the hard skills to teach. They're not something that you can get somebody to regurgitate and go, yep, no worries, or copy what you're doing. It takes a long time to develop those skills, and therefore they should be spread across a whole training for them. But that was kind of had a bit of wind, had no finance behind it. But those, like every good educator, those educators that are passionate about making sure that they make a difference in people's lives, still make sure that all of those are incorporated. But at the moment, I think you'll find that it's a survival mode. It's how can you get these people through? It's will people still be employed at the end of the term or the semester, because there's not enough people going through, there's not enough dollars going through, so therefore it's more about making sure that they get them through as effectively and efficiently as they can. And so the affordances of some of the value add that we should be offering students. So something like a university degree that's, you know it's going to be 3 years long, and so therefore you can work on those graduate capabilities. I'm not guaranteeing that that's what happens in universities, but at least can put them in the program over a 3-year period. Whereas, we can deliver a qualification in 8 weeks. Now how can you work on somebody's general capabilities and see a real effect in just 8 weeks? It's a lot harder. So it's very, very. It is. People want to be student focused, but the bottom line is can we afford to be student focused?
I mean, there was such a big push in the around 2000, that kind of area around adult learning theory, and making sure all the teachers were focused on that, and student-centeredness, and all, that kind of stuff. And it's I feel a lot of the good quality approaches in terms of what we know to be good teaching practice have kind of gone by the wayside a little bit, and because, as Alison said, where students are being force-fed through as quickly as possible. And
yeah, well, that's what it's interesting. I mean, the whole the training packages. Some of the criticism of training packages is that they're too big. That actually some industry are saying that they want more specific skills. They feel that training packages are just give too much. They're too big. They're too wide ranging, and they want more. They want their workers to have a particular set of skills, and I don't feel the training packages are doing that. Whereas you're talking about this,
it seems to me that we're due a major change in the whole post-school system or systems. We've kind of I feel as though we've reached crunch point, and that things are going downhill very quickly, and something's got to give. You almost need to throw everything in the air and start again. Nothing's working. Higher ed doesn't seem to be working. That doesn't seem to be working. There are a lot of people falling through gaps who are not getting the support that they need.
Mm. Well, I mean, that's also one of the criticisms that's made of training packages, is that they're not flexible enough, that they're not able to change enough for rapid transformations in society, whether that be industries that are disintermediated and new industries emerge very rapidly, or technologies within a particular industry that transform very quickly, that training packages can't adjust quickly enough. Then, of course, there's a criticism by some RTOs, particularly private RTOs, have made this criticism that training packages change too quickly, too often, and that they have to spend too much time fulfilling the regulatory arrangements, having to reapply for scope, etc.
Well, one thing that I didn't mention that I think, and I don't know, Michael, if you'd agree with me, but one thing that was very strong, in our early careers was collaboration, and I think cross-sectoral collaboration happened. And again, it was mainly in language and literacy, I think, but it happened because there was enough, there was enough funding. There was no competition for that, for that funding. So, it encouraged us. Where I was, TAFE and ACE and Skillshare all spent a morning a week in what was then Centrelink, I think, and advising potential students and directing them to the appropriate provider that would better suit their needs. I can't imagine that happening now.
Yep, I can remember doing that, referring people to a private provider regularly, every week, because just the program that was offered down the road was more suited to that particular student.
So now here we are in a highly competitive system, even though I can remember somebody saying a year or two ago that the number of places that they are wanting to create couldn't possibly be met or be offered by the existing providers. The suggestion was that in order to train the number of Australians that was suggested, every provider would be full to the hilt, and there's room for more. But it seems that the current systems are being rolled out, but there hasn't been any more funding. It's just kind of squeezing the same amount of money into different areas.
Government funding in the vet sector has pretty much plateaued for the last 10 years. So, and the Commonwealth has increased its funding, but states, it's pretty much plateaued. But I mean, maybe that's another issue which I was just thinking of when you've been all talking. The vet sector has been very government-driven, and if it were not for the states, if it certainly were not for the Commonwealth since the 1970s, we wouldn't have the vet sector. Now, governments have identified national priorities, whether they be skill shortages or whether they be the need to have the population trained, because they know that results in employment outcomes, and the governments, you look at the National, the Productivity Commission, if you read any of their reports, that will show you that training the population, the investment the government makes in training the population is returned many times in terms of a growth in the economy and tax return to the government. They've done the numbers. Economists actually work it out, that the government ends up even better off having an educated population. But what has that meant is I think that the vet sector has been almost entirely driven by the government and its associated bureaucracies. And I think whether that is a good thing or a bad thing is a matter for debate, and in some ways a political thing. But what we have seen, I think, in the last 10 years, and it's the Labor government that's done this through COAG and the Commonwealth initiatives, is to try to, in terms of government funding, broaden the delivery base beyond its own provisional systems, that is TAFE.
But that
to use the market as a more effective distributor.
What would be said there is that that's about choice and giving students choice. But in reality, I think it came out of that realisation that if, and Alison, you might be able to remember the figures, but it was something like doubling the number of people, participating in higher level qualifications or something by 2020. But I think it came out of a realisation that TAFE couldn't do that. TAFE simply didn't have the resources or infrastructure to do that, so they needed to broaden it in order to meet those needs. But now we're in a situation where students are given that choice in a very complex kind of way, which we might like to discuss. But there's no more funding, so there's no more places. So we're spreading the available funding even more widely.
Yeah, well, what's meant is the government is not increasing the funding, it's just shifting the funding into the private space, or the private providers that are getting government funding to deliver.
Yeah, I think there was
initiatives.
I think there was an understanding amongst the vet community that all of this would come with more funding, but it hasn't.
Well, I mean, COAG tied it. See, that COAG national partnership program said to the states, we'll give you $500 million, but you have to introduce contestability, but otherwise you don't get the money. So hence, states have, moved towards a more contestable environment in order to get this Commonwealth funding. And that was a Labor government driven initiative through COA.
Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that, and again, Alison, you're probably the best place to comment on this, but I assume that kind of contestable model where students are given the funding to select where they would like to go is now Australia-wide as of this year. Is that correct? Does anyone know?
What was the question there? Sorry?
Is that contestable model where students are given the funding and they essentially purchase their own place? Is that Australia-wide now?
It's certainly well, we know it decimated Victoria. It's the roll-on effect in South Australia it's been felt from some areas, and the long tail's yet to happen, or it's happening and will continue to happen. And so Queensland started, I think, last year, New South Wales this year, and WA, if it's not this year, it will be sometime pretty soon. So I'm not sure about Tasmania and the territories. But I understand the model, but but the assumption is in that model is that the consumer knows what they're buying, and the thing with education and training, it's not like a car or a computer that you can touch or feel and compare an orange with an orange. You are just looking at something that you have, and once you board it, once you buy into it, you've lost. So it happened quickly in Victoria, where there were, this insurgence of people who are personal trainers, and these people, that was their one chance to get government training, and then they flooded the market, and there was no job opportunities. So it did rely on a well-informed consumer, which we know that's not the case. So it's got its flaws. In South Australia, our government kind of prided itself, or used its spin doctors to say how wonderful it was, how they achieved all of their target numbers of training in 2013, when really the budget should have stretched to 2015. And so now there's a lot of people that can't get training because they just can't afford it. They just can't afford $2,000 or $3,000 to get a Cert 2 or a Cert 3. So it will have a longer term impact, and because the way our political system is that it's a kind of 2 to 3 turnaround on changing governments, and that's all they're worried about is putting themselves in for that next term, that they don't really care what impact it's going to have in 2 or 3 years, or what it's happening to young people and people who are on low incomes. That's not their concern. Their concern is about getting voted in the next round of elections.
Yeah, look, I think that is one of the things that's a problem for the vet sector, is that it, because it is so government driven, not just from a funding point of view, but from a regulatory point of view. I mean, governments, and it's so complex. You've got the Commonwealth government with its own agenda, then you've got each state government with its own agenda, and it's just incredibly complex, and each government decides that they're going to do something different. If you have a look on the wiki, I've put up a document there, which is a sort of history of vet policy from the 1960s, and well, you look at that, you just nearly fall off your chair. It's just astonishing. All these endless papers, the Kangan paper, this paper, that paper, and all these people have come up with these brilliant ideas for the vet sector, and just, turn the dice again. And then in a few years goes by, oh, well, that didn't work, so we'll try something else. And the whole sector's just sort of at the mercy of all these people trying these different approaches.
Seems to me at the moment in New South Wales, it's I suspect that this new approach has been fairly carefully orchestrated, but as a result, it's incredibly complex. And I gather that there's some quite serious issues appearing now that the semester has started with, particularly in rural areas where there are students who have, what do they call it? Is it an entitlement or a voucher? Have a voucher, but when they go into their local provider, the provider is saying, oh, well, no, we're not offering that now. So, the student is then stuck with nowhere, to spend their voucher.
I think you're right. I mean, the New South Wales government did take a fairly soft approach to it, and probably the Victorian experience, which took the very neoliberal sort of laissez-faire approach, and it pretty much, almost killed the TAFE sector. And South Australia was taking a fairly vociferous approach too with contestability. So I think the New South Wales government's taken a fairly measured approach, and they've actually been quite criticised. I mean, ACPET recently came out and said that they didn't think that the New South Wales had mock contestability, that it wasn't really a contestable environment at all, that in fact they even challenged whether New South Wales hadn't hoodwinked the federal government by accepting the National Partnership Agreement money, and hadn't really implemented full contestability. So, it's interesting that that the private providers aren't happy with the degree to which they were able to access government funding, and that it was necessarily overly bureaucratic. That there was no transparency in the process. I think that was another big criticism.
Of course, another introduction is vet fee help, which essentially is like HECS and a loan scheme. But I really feel for people who are wanting to reskill or to, they've done some training in the past and that's kind of gone to a dead end and they're wanting to is for their courses, and sure, a lot of the courses are eligible for vet fee help, but it's a big burden on somebody to have that repayment on top of the other impacts on their lives at the moment. So a couple of years ago, there was also mooted that vet and higher ed would merge. That seems to have died by the wayside.
Can I, just before we go on to that, can I just talk about the loans, the sort of vet fee help? And I actually have a figure here that there's been a blowout from $325 million that the government has paid out for vet fee help to $1.5 billion last year. Now, I think what's significant about that is just the level of debt that the population is taking on, and ostensibly the government is borrowing money on behalf of citizens, giving it to the provider, and then charging the citizen interest. Now we've become familiar with it in the higher ed environment, and I guess the argument by the Labor government that introduced it said, well, people who do degrees get a significant personal financial advantage from having a degree. All the stats shows that, so they should make a contribution. Now, that's a similar argument that's being used in the vet sector because there's clear evidence. So if you look at any of the NCPR research, it'll show that if you have a vet qualification, one, you get employment, and two, you're actually better off financially. by a significant amount. So they're using the same argument there. You should make a contribution. But it worries me to see this level of indebtedness that the population is increasingly.
Well, that's what I meant. People who are probably on quite low incomes in many cases.
Now, theoretically, they don't pay it until they reach the threshold, but there's no guarantee.
Oh, they're over the threshold now. Yeah. We're talking about people on 40,000 and things like that.
Yeah.
But Stefan, I think what's come out of that is that there was a lot. There's intermediaries. I think the new standards have tried to squash those intermediaries, and these intermediaries must have access to databases. Like in South Australia, we have they call it SATAC, so it's a tertiary admission centre where students are applying for entry into TAFE and into the universities, and I think they must have some sort of access to this, because what they then do is cold call these students, and they offer these students the same sort of diploma that TAFE would offer them less than, say maybe it's $3,000 or $4,000. They offer these students that they could get them it free up front, but offering them it at a $10,000 or a $15,000. So there was been a large exploitation of that vet fee help, again by an intermediary, but again by a consumer market that has little or no idea what they're buying, how much they should be paying, who they should be going with. So I think they've tried to pull it into line through the new standards, but there's a lot of people that have been duped, including people. There's been a lot of news of people with disabilities. So it's an interesting space when you shift it across to buy now, pay later, because you don't really care what you pay because it doesn't hurt you now.
That's right. It's a radio rentals model of education.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Harvey Norman became a billionaire out of it, of course. And those organisations like Radio Rentals and Harvey Norman, they target the poorest parts of the population. They don't go and target the wealthy. They target the poor because they're the ones who are quite, will go into debt and don't understand the things they're signing. And certainly you're right, Alison. There's been a lot of concern around some of the recent entrance to the vet marketplace, for want of a better word, around telling people that their course is free, and if when in fact they're being put into debt, and simply being put into debt has its consequences. If you try to get a car loan or you try to get some other type of loan, that debt will come up. It will be assessed, and they may say, sorry, we're not going to give you a personal loan because you've got this debt.
Yeah, that's possible.
There's advertising on television over the last couple of weeks from a company who says they can actually remove your credit debt. They'll just remove it, just like that. Join up, pay a fee, and we'll get rid of all your debt. That is your credit history and your bad debt history. So that's significant. If there's someone who sees a business in that area, clearly, like you say, Steph, mounting levels of individual debt or bad credit records, so there's now a company to deal with that problem. I need to go.
It costs you about $1,000 per debt that you have to actually get your credit cleared.
Okay, so it's not cheap.
No, not at all.
Well, how are they doing that? I mean, presumably banks have this as a record. Why would they get rid of this? I mean, who are they paying? Is it some sort of corrupt?
They're going through groups like Dun & Bradstreet who keep your credit records. There's a group called Credit Wash that actually are doing this. But I actually called up because I had it's all paid for and has been for years. I had a debt with the telecom, and they said to me that just to get that one debt, which was something like $150, was going to cost me $999 for them to go through and do it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Michael, I heard you say that you've got to go, but I really like to talk more about what you said about, innovation going down the gurgler, and probably 10 years ago I had to speak somewhere and said, when times are tough, innovation's always one of the first things to go. But I'm interested, it's particularly so at the moment, and I'm really interested in what the consequences of that will be.
I wonder whether we should kind of mark that as a starting point for another discussion, because when I was saying that earlier, the first thing I thought to myself was, let's have some examples of where it's actually benefited. So we were in that kind of gravy train, as some people called it, and it would be good to look at where the pluses were and do, as you suggest, what doesn't happen if there is no funding of innovation. I'd like to throw another angle into it too, which we won't have time to talk about, but I just had the feeling when I was in vet that what was going on in vet, where all the resources, all the energy, all the money was directed towards a cookie cutter model of education more and more, based on standards, national training levels, all of that stuff, whereas in society as a whole, what you've got happening en masse is an individualization of training and activity and employment and personal behaviours, and this has all come across or happened as a result of internet and social media. So where you've got an individualisation, I think, en masse of people on the planet, you've still got education systems which are basically industrial models churning out the same product. And until all our education systems get their heads around that and refocus what they do, we're going to have an ongoing problem of the education system, and vet in particular won't meet the needs of people who have individual desires. So anyway, that's, I think, another aspect that's worth talking about maybe another time.
Indeed.
Part B, I think.
Part B. Well, we've been going an hour, so we should wrap it up. And I must apologise to you, Vance. It's not been a topic that you could particularly engage with.
Well, actually, I've had a lot of connections with you guys, over the years, and probably at a time when, apparently, from what Michael is saying, things were more innovative. But speaking of the present and the future, what about MOOCs? Are they making any inroads on the VET sector funded by the government? Because that's actually where people can get education for free, and exactly what you're talking about, I think.
I actually don't think they are, to be quite honest. What do you think, Michael?
No, they're not. And I think that's interesting in itself. What I did hear, the most interesting take I've heard on this, is that organisations, that is companies, who often do their own training, are a little bit freaked out by MOOCs, because they do have, there are people who work in organisations right now who, instead of signing up for training programs via the official channels within the organisation, they're doing a MOOC. And of course, this means standards are out the window. You don't have everybody doing the same training, and this is what I mean by it's breaking down the cookie cutter approach. People aren't doing the company training, they're doing the MOOC training, which is individualised. Problem for companies.
Sure, for compliance, etc.
Yeah.
Mind you, we went to that Learning at Work conference together, and we did see a number of rather large companies putting their staff through MOOCs.
That's right.
Like, that they were embracing it in that sense. But yeah.
I think MOOCs assume, potentially quite a high level of skill to access and really participate and get a lot out of it. So there would only be perhaps a certain level of vet that it would be useful for at all, but certainly not happening at the moment.
No. Or we don't know. It could be happening. We will stop monitored. We don't know, do we?
So can I suggest perhaps, because we haven't talked a lot about technology and we haven't talked about innovation, so it sounds like a nice little package to return to next time.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Well, we'll end the formal podcast. We can still keep chatting if you want, but I shall stop the broadcast and there we go, wrap it up for first one of 2015.
Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone, and good night.
And I'll just speak for Alison Miller, who in the text chat said to tell everybody goodbye. She didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation. Thanks, Steph.
I'll just say goodbye for Alex Hayes. He's got caught up with something. And thank you for welcoming me in today. And I hope to join in more of the discussions.
Fabulous. Lovely to have you here, Jacinta.
Good on you, Jacinta.
FLN fold?
No, FLL.
FLL. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
God, FLL.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, of course.
Flexible learning leaders.
Yeah, not the leaders. They're not part of a network. They're not a network. They're leaders, of course.
Leaders anymore.
I don't know.
Oh, dear.
I still think they have a significant influence. There's still quite a few of them around.
Increasingly has been something.
We learn.
Flexible learning lurkers.
Yes.
That's right.
Thanks for having me along too. Make this a truly global conversation.
Yes.
See you all next time.
Bye.
Thanks, Vance. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Good night.